Gentlemen, welcome. Are you comfortable?
Yes.
Are you worried about falling off your stools?
Yeah.
Okay, let's kick off. A lot of the conversation yesterday referred to digital transformation. Now, what I wondered, sat down listening to the presentations, was when we're talking about digital transformation, do we all actually mean the same thing? And what does it mean to individuals and different companies, maybe in different verticals, in different roles? So maybe Stephane, we'll start with you. Sorry to wake you up. Maybe we start with you as to what does digital transformation mean to you?
Super open question. Okay. I guess it depends where you stand in your... There is digital transformation, and I think there is also an idea of maturity phases. So digital transformation might mean different things based on your company and where you stand within that maturity curve. Digital transformation covers different things, and I can maybe also tell what it means for the Economist. But broadly speaking, and I'm sure Patrick and Vincent will relate to that, digital transformation is about the way you work together or the way you manage projects. So there is an idea of how you deliver things. Digital transformation is about the way you build product. Digital transformation is about the way you manage customer experience. Digital transformation is about how you also leverage insights to drive your business differently. Digital transformation is also about the way you even change your organization to cope with that. And last but not least, digital transformation is maybe the way you even change your business model with the use of data. So it could be many, many, many different things. But clearly, it's not about millennials, and it's not about Twitter. I heard one day in a conversation someone from a brick-and-mortar company in construction saying this, digital, yeah, these digital things for millennials and social media, I don't think the point. And we just raised the point that even in construction, digital was transforming the way they manage a business. The way you leverage sensors to optimize your operation on the field, or the fact you can even print houses using 3D printing, for example.
Okay. Vincent?
Hey. So let me start with a question. Who in this room was born before 1969? Please raise your hand. Okay. So usually the number is higher. So even if you're born after, you've all seen the picture of the first man on the moon, right? It's a picture everybody saw. The picture you might not have seen is a picture of the hardware and software systems that landed a man on the moon. At that time, it was as big as this wall, and it was really the concentrate of all the technology every engineer could dream about. And it costed $1 million, and really the best of the technology you could have. Now, today, if you have $2, you can buy this system on a chip. It's 4,000 times more powerful than the Apollo 11 guidance system. What does it mean? It means that whenever it costs $2, $2 is the cost if you take your iPhone, you order it on Alibaba.com, buy 1 unit, shipping included in your own mailbox. Okay? So you have at your fingertip thousands more computation power that any engineer could dream about 50 years ago. So now the question is, do you think that every big machine, every power plant, every train, every railroad system has integrated the fact that you could have basically a NASA computation power everywhere to optimize everything? Of course not. So the digital transformation is exactly about this. It's about telling people, okay, you had several tools in your toolbox. Now you can add the cloud, you can add data science, you can add machine learning, and even if you don't understand anything on machine learning, you have API that are easy to use. And if you add all these tools to your toolbox, now how would you rethink your process? How would you think you do things differently? And if you do this, in fact, that's exactly what my business is doing. We're seeing 200 industrial customers per year, and our customers are Arianespace, Saint-Gobain, Schindler for elevators, Exelon for the power in the US. And that's exactly what we're doing with them. We're working with them to help them using new tools in the digital toolbox. And when you do this, you usually have two phases. And for example, if you look at the story, in history, the replacement of steam machine by electric engine, it happened in two phases. First phase, people took away the big steam machine and put a big electrical machine just instead. Basically, doing the same stuff as before, but in a bit more efficient way. With this, you have maybe 10-20% of the value. And it took 20, 30 years, almost a generation, to go to the second level of transformation. So at that time, it was electric transformation, not digital. And in this case, you understand that with electricity, you don't need to have a big centralized source of power somewhere in your plant. You can have small engines, small motors, whenever you need power. But with this new concept, you have to rethink totally how you design plants, how big plants you are, how you disseminate plants in the country. And it takes decades to do so. And decades, that's where we are. If you think about the internet bubble was in 2000, we're in 2018. Go to any plant and you'll see the interface of the machine, very bulky, very far from the iPhone Apple experience. You'll see how connected are the machines, very often not so much. And so there is still a huge potential, which is basically about helping people understanding these new digital tools and helping them rethink their process so that they can do things that they could not even imagine with the old tools. That's what digital transformation is about.
Okay, great, thank you. Patrick, how would you define digital transformation?
Well, I must say, having been working on digital transformation for many years, one thing that kind of pissed me off, so to speak, is this very technical definition of digital transformation. Every time you talk about digital transformation, you're talking about, usually after 2 seconds about IT. IT, technology, and right now, if you look at all the buzzword, VR, AR, big data, and so on. When you look at it, and as a consumer, when actually you're looking at how digital has been transforming our lives, it's all about the consumer. I happened to co-wrote a book 2 years ago with my friend Nicolas Rioux, trying to summarize all those consumer trends and trying to define what we call the Uber consumer. So looking at mobile, social, the whole massive change from ownership to usage, omni-channel, and so on. And that's really the change from the consumer that is really impacting today corporation, being either big industrial companies or like small SME in services or wherever. And then because of this change and evolution of the consumer, then you have got different enablers or topics around transformation. Yes, you do have IT. You do have, what we talked about yesterday, the whole topics around, customer experience, being either B2C or B2B, by the way. All the topics around data, and also all the topics around, how to get there in terms of organization, in terms of open innovation, i.e. how corporates can work with startups, and last but not least, everything around change management. And talking about change management, to me, we're going to discuss that later, but change management is maybe the big elephant on the table, because that's where today most companies and corporates are more or less failing, but because that's the hardest part to do, because it's all about human.
Yeah. So, I think you're sort of touching on it there, Patrick. Again, lots of the conversations yesterday, when they referred to digital transformation, talked back to the fact that so many of them were perceived to have failed. So as you've got the mic, Patrick, why are so many projects failing?
Well, I think first for this exact reason, because there were lots of chicken and the egg and bad start to start with. A lot of digital transformation have been focused, for example, on IT. I remember in France, for example, a few years ago, there have been this like kind of a media PR battle where a lot of CAC 40 companies were competing in terms of how big and how much money they would put on the table talking about digital transformation. So AXA, the French insurance company, started the game saying, we're going to invest 500 million euros. And then, a few weeks later, SNCF, French Railroad, said, we're going to invest, 250. And then, Accor said, we're going to put 300. And then AXA came back saying, well, by the way, we're not going to invest 500, we're going to invest 900 million euros. And the reason why this obviously amount were so big is that 80% of those investments were actually IT investment, which to be clear, are important. But the key thing is one, for what, and two, if you only focus on IT and not on the rest, focusing on IT, if you're not focusing as Brian, for example, mentioned yesterday on the consumer and the consumer experience, then your IT project is going to fail. If you're only focusing on IT and taking like an IT partner, but not at all worrying about how it's going to be implemented internally in terms of governance, in terms of organization, and so on, in terms of change of mindset, that would be a big failure. And actually, right now, discussing with a lot of CDOs, CEOs, and so on their current digital transformation, most of them are saying we're actually just starting, because the toughest one, again, is really on the human part. I was discussing with the guys and the HR director of Accor a few months ago, and even though they've been investing a lot in buying startups, in investing in IT, and so on, the key thing, the end of the story will be when the 200,000 customer-facing employees of Accor will get this new digital strategy and really use all the different stuff that have been implemented. And that's where I fully agree with what Michael said yesterday. That's currently one of the failure of some of the big suite investment, where actually in most companies people are using like 5% of the Salesforce capacity, or even less from the Adobe suite and so on, because the whole change management piece has been put on the side. And that's why I think Gilles wrote an article, Gilles Babinet wrote an article a few weeks ago saying that the new CDO is the HR SVP, and I fully agree on that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Stephane, you looked for a moment like you were disagreeing with him there.
No, I agreed.
I'm just trying to start a fight.
My eyes were a bit like, because there is this phantasma of digital transformation is done, right? So CEOs put money for 2 years, and now we're done, right?
Right.
We're ready, so let's stop there.
Yeah.
But it's an incremental, ongoing process when you have to shift things always. So I have one example about a perceived failed transformation in our company. The error was to say we're going to build a new website, as an example. 2 years of work. And if people wait for the new website to come in, and they see the new website, and so what? What they didn't understand is that we changed everything about the back end, which was an IT project, to do what? To allow us to have a component-based approach so that we can iterate and better the product always and always and always. So the project was about to deliver a capability to keep optimizing always on. So it was just a start. And then exactly as you said, yes, you invest into the back end, which is exciting for no one internally, but then it means you need to assign new skills to use that new environment, which means if you have a component-based website, which you can adapt based on insights, you need to have, therefore, a cross-functional team with a data analyst, user experience person, and change the way you operate, go and move to a sprint-based approach, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the prime also, is how we explain that to folks internally, not just externally.
Yeah, okay. Vincent?
Yeah, I love talking about failure, because that's how you learn, and I'm very good at this. Failing. So I would say 3 reasons. First, in many cases, you've seen, I would say, strategies that were more aiming at doing some buzz for the market analysis, so making some short-term stock increase, and not really changing stuff. That's not exactly the case of Accor, but if you see what they're doing, they find now all their historically pure IT guys. And they were good guys. Just at that time, the CEO thought that, okay, he could make a case by telling the market, okay, I will change more than everybody else. So I put money, I put people. I don't really look at the value. I just want to try stuff and being the first to do this. Another example, it was you saw with, for example, IBM and Watson, which was, I would say, in some way overselling machine learning. For example, they had a 60 million partnership with a hospital, and after 60 million, the hospital stopped and told, okay, we don't think we have the value in this technology. So in a way, they learned something, but that was a learning that was relatively expensive. And in all these technology waves, and you could look at in the history, you have this overselling in some part of the market and under-investing in other part. And there are two ways to lose money. Either you do too much or not enough. The second reason, I would say, is that company failed because, so first one was doing some hype. You fail because it's doomed to fail. You just do it for the market. You don't structure it to really have impact. Second reason is you need time to master the technology. So in a way you fail, but you learn in the process. And in this part, digital vendors have a responsibility, and IBM for Watson is a good example because they oversold something. So that's good in the short term, but in the long term, it makes a problem for the customer, and I would say from their image. And the third one is a good reason why you see failure is what I would say the Tobruk strategy. So most of you probably didn't see this French black and white movie called The Taxi for Tobruk. So I invite you to look at this movie, but there is one scene in this movie happening during the Second World War. You have 4 heroes on a jeep, lost in a desert, and the jeep breaks. So they are here, lost in the desert. They start discussing with one another and try to understand, try to figure how they will get out of the desert. And they talk and they talk and they start arguing, and then one of the heroes stand up and tells the other, okay, I don't know how to get out. I know one thing. If I walk, I have some chance to get out. If I stay here talking, I will die in the desert. And he leaves. And the 2 heroes that stay close to the jeep look at themselves and tell themselves, okay, maybe he's right. One brute walking goes further than 2 intellectual sittings. And part of the discovery of how you use this toolbox is also trying stuff. And sometimes, if you don't fail enough, that means that you're not in the right strategy. That happens with all the phases where you have not fully mature technology. A mature technology is a technology that is in a brick, so simple that you can use it without understanding what happens inside. Think about the car. 1 century ago, to buy a car, you needed to understand the mechanics because it was braking, the roads were not made for the car, and so you couldn't drive a car if you don't understand the technology, and people had accidents, tried and did failure to discover it. Now, if you want to use a car today, even your car repairman doesn't know how it works. He's just changing an electronic board without understanding how it works. That's what a mature technology is about. Mm-hmm. And in digital technology, I would say we're in the middle today. And part of this is that people try, and part of the people trying are failing.
Yeah. So, Stephane, just picking up on one of the points you made there, you were talking about the fact that organizational changes and you're ripping and replacing. But the organization doesn't appreciate that. How do you, as a CDO, go back to the organization and explain the process you're going through with a digital transformation, or don't you?
You don't really explain too much a master plan because it's hard to. What did I learn in the failure? I guess also I did that for 5 years, right? So I just moved on a few weeks ago to an innovation kind of job for the group. So I was chief data officer up to the last few months. First of all, there is not the organization. There are different business units. Mm. So it's very hard to tackle the organization as the business because there are pockets. And some want to work with you, some don't want to work with you. Some want to change, some don't want to change. So the first thing is just to pick the positive force that's going to drive and want to do things with you. Then that creates a very specific use case. and other people want to work with you. So it's very simple like that. I know it's very candid, but unfortunately that's the way to do things. But funnily enough, that's why I smile a bit, because you don't say everything, is my strategy was always to build something very specific to you, for example, just for you. But in reality, always build a capability that will support other use cases moving forward. So when someone else come back, can you do that for me? Let me think about it. There was already the components ready to do something. So it's really interesting how to see that what I learned in the last 5 years, I'm a former sales guy. So I go in a chief data officer job. I don't even know how to use Excel. So imagine that. I thought the technology would be the hardest part of the game, right? That was pretty easy to get there. The second phase was the talents. That takes time to get the right talents, but the real stretch was the organization in different levels. One is by nature, the digital offers new opportunities to do things because there are more customer touch points, which means more department concerned, more use case with what you do. So what you do is lateral. You're slicing the organization because you can't afford to go through a vertical approach on everything, go step by step. So your project brings different folks along the side. So for that, you start to do all the buzzwords such as cross-functional, virtual task force, which just mean forget about the direct line, get shit done without going through the manager.
Yeah.
That's one. But then the last phase is when it starts to bubble up, where everybody really want to work differently. The last mile is the organization itself. So I'm going to give you one example. In the last few months, we had to reorganize our whole company to tackle digital, because we were organized with a leader on circulation, which is marketing for subscription. We had a P&L for advertising. We had a P&L for products. And we had a P&L for data, which mostly was a L, not a P. and I said that the last few weeks, say, what is the next step? Say, well, I did the tech, I did the people. The last stretch is just the way we drive the business. And so there was a whole reorg, where now there is one leadership, one P&L, with finally media, circulation, data, and product. It looks obvious for everyone, but it wasn't the case for us, for example.
Yeah, okay. That's great, thank you. One of the presentations we saw yesterday was with a great presentation from Brian Solis. And you know, Brian considers himself a futurist, and it was great listening to Brian as to what he thought of the future. But Brian, of course, is a theorist. He's an analyst. And I can say this because he's on a plane right now. He's not there in the real world where you guys are. So where do you see the future, and how quickly is it going to happen?
Well, in fact, I have feet in both sides of the river, because I'm also president of a think tank, which is a long-term observatory. But at General Electric, it's more a quarter observatory. So I see the differences. I would say, first, it will take time. And it already took time. And think about it. Internet was born in the 70s. The internet bubble was in the 2000s. And today, in 2018, so look like many processes are still very, very paper-based. So it will take time. Second thing, I think that you need to think about the Gartner hype curve. You know this curve? It's a curve telling you that for any technology, start with nobody caring about, and then you have a bubble, and in the end, you reach a middle ground where the technology is really where you bring value. I think you will have this, especially, for example, in machine learning. I really think that we'll see a lot of uses, but probably not the most terrific one or the one that people expect so much about it. Third one is about the Moore's law. How quick the technology will keep improving. And this one is tough, but if you look at the statistics more in the physics and studies, then you see that this, for some dimension, this curve is starting to saturate a little bit. And there is a good demonstration about this. So think about your iPhone. So the first iPhone was 120 megabytes in terms of memory. The last one is 64 gigabytes. Now, if you want to have the genome of every human living in the world, you need 10 to the power 20 bytes. If you want to have the state of all the atoms in the universe, you need 10 to the power 80 bytes. Now, if the Moore law keeps going on, in year 2265, your iPhone will have this capacity, or Moore's law will stop before. I think it will happen, and I think it's a very good news for people like you, because it means that the relative value of human intelligence and artificial intelligence will reach a plateau where there's still lots of things to do with human intelligence. So it's more future, a long-term answer, but I wanted to bring this one.
No, that's great. Patrick, where are we heading?
Well, one of the issue, or one of the complexity talking about digital transformation, which, by the way, for me is more like transformation in general, rather than pure digital transformation, is the complexity of the world we are in. And on that point, because or thanks to technology, the fact that it's becoming more and more complex. Some of the speakers mentioned that yesterday. So it's pretty hard to have like the crystal ball and being a futurologist today. But back to my previous point, the three area personally, and I'm looking at in terms on the startup side, because I'm doing both consulting for corporate and investing and coaching startups, is on three fields: technology, people, and ideas. On technology, I was the first one, for example, to be quite skeptical around AR and VR in terms of business model and usage. And actually, as of today, you are starting to see like real usage, either B2C or actually much more on the B2B side. Obviously, around big data, machine learning, and so on. I mean, the potential is huge. One, because the technology is accelerating, and two, because we are starting from very low. One thing that always surprised me is how backward and late all the main actors in the finance industry are. I mean, when you think about it, insurance, for example, their own business model is built on big data. They have been managing data for nearly a century, and they are just starting to really accelerate on all those big data solutions and so on. Blockchain is one interesting topic. I was discussing with one startup specialized in blockchain on Monday, and that, for example, they've been working with Carrefour on this very important issue, which is certification. And they've been working on a blockchain system to do the whole certification on the chicken field. But with all the topics right now on health and so on, just on the pure certification, blockchain has got a lot of potential. Voice is huge. I used to be the marketing director of SFR, and at that time already we're already talking about IVR, voice recognition, and so on. And I agree with you. 20 years later, try to sometime how painful it can be when your favorite operator is not recognizing some pretty basic information. So lots of potential on voice. So it's true that on the technological side there are lots of potential, but again it won't become concrete unless you think it from the consumer eyes. I've been seeing so many startups with like a great tech, but absolutely no idea on how does that improve the customer experience, or on how to sell it. The second area is around people, around HR, around training. One point I fully agreed during the campaign, the presidential campaign with Macron, is the fact of saying that everyone will have to relearn his job more and more. And for sure, and you see that everywhere, in every single dimension of the corporate, and in any type of sector. And there is like a huge field around training, so from the MOOC, from e-learning, but also like a good physical learning. Huge, maybe one of the most late sector is education, and I personally think that the education, from kids school all the way to university, is going to be totally transformed. So huge thing on that space. And talking about people, everything around new way of working together. Again, that was mentioned yesterday. And I think that the whole system of corporate organization, which basically dates back to sometime the 19th century, with, as Jill mentioned, this kind of army influence in terms of a pyramid organization and so on, that can't work anymore in most corporations. And then the third field is really on idea. And that's where I'm more excited talking about digital or transformation, is that the potential is unlimited. But in order to get there, and I'm always surprised and admiring all those new startups and CEO of startups we came up with, either very basic ideas, but at least the execution is there, or some stuff where like, oh yeah, of course, so obvious. Even if you look in like a big unicorns, I mean Uber, I mean from a technological stack point of view, I mean not really impressive, and the idea itself is quite basic. But they were just the first one to have the idea, and then after that have a pretty good execution. And that's what I'm saying to CMOs or CEOs of corporation. Always go back to the current pain points of your employees, of your partners, of your customers, and of your prospect. And again, keep it simple. When you look at some success story, being either Cézanne in France on retail or BlaBlaCar, I mean the idea, the message, and the definition of the product is super simple.
Just one point. I heard a story that Uber, the idea came in Paris. Yeah. So the story was the guys were at Vivatech, right? At the web conference, and they went out, they couldn't find a cab.
Yeah, exactly. It was the consequence of the bad management by the public sector of the taxi. Bad regulation.
We can do innovation.
Led to innovation. France is good for this.
That's good. So these are, maybe I can give one example about future for the Economist, which is, my job now is to make the future happen now. Because there are some concepts like machine learning, all these things, and like it's going to be in 5 years, in 10 years. So I'm going to give you one example about something which I'm trying to make happen now. If you look at, we have two businesses. One business is a newspaper, which is pretty obvious. So that's a paper that you subscribe, or we make money through advertising. We also have another business, which is called Economist Intelligence Unit. And that business is a market research, market intelligence business, which means in plain English, we provide government, NGOs, companies with data about countries, about industries, about risk. And that business is from the 1950s. So in the 1950s, the miracle was to get access to government and institutional data across 200 countries so that you can create a meaningful report, a meaningful analysis, and a meaningful forecast. So what is the point with the future? The point with the future is that, and we talked about digital transformation, this business model is about to die, and no one sees it. Why? First, you've got all government and institutional publishing data. So there is the open data movement, which means anyone else can come in and get access to the same data. That said, we can argue that we are smart, so we analyze differently, our forecast is better, but it means someone can come in and do the same thing. But more interestingly, if you look at digital transformation, new things, there are sensors everywhere. Sensors on the ground, sensors in the sky. So when you combine two things, one is you've got sensors on the ground in the sky through satellites, through planes, through drones, through mobile technology, and machine learning, and the costs associated to processing this data at scale, you can now datafy the world. So you talked about having the universe in your mobile phone. I've met companies now that are leveraging satellite and machine learning to track objects, patterns on the Earth. They are leveraging space to understand what happens on Earth and to the Earth. So one example, you talk about a movie, so I'm going to use another movie. Did you guys see a movie called Trading Place with Eddie Murphy? So in this movie, there is two folks. One is a guy living in the streets, and the other guy is a trader. He's a commodity trader. So his business is to trade against orange or cereals or that kind of stuff. And one story at the end of the movie is someone is trying to get hold of the official numbers about the orange supply in Florida. Because if you know this number, you know how you're going to trade. Is the supply going up or going down? I found a company in the US called Descartes Lab, who's been spending 5 years just looking at satellite images, leveraging machine learning, looking at weather. They can predict exact yields of any crops in the US by 1% margin error only. So that means that the whole concept of measuring human activity or even thinking about supply is totally dramatically changed by the technology happening. Today, to conclude, it's mostly used by traders because they want to get a competitive advantage about what they're trading. But tomorrow, we should change in our companies the way we measure things happening in industries and countries. And the day after tomorrow, I even bet that government will stop trying to collect their own data somehow because there will be new ways to do it. So that's a simple example about future happening now.
Okay. So
just one other example I was thinking about. Think about knowledge management. In most companies today, it's still people knowing people, exchanging PowerPoints on email. So that's very, very old-fashioned. And I think this domain will change a lot. So a lot of companies have been talking about, okay, let's use less email, let's do other things. It's still not happening, but I think we'll see big move in this domain, which is impacting a lot company like you.
Okay. So there's a lot of talk at the moment about new technologies, and of course, there's more and more buzzwords coming down the lines. You know, we've got the likes of blockchain, we've got AI, we've got machine learning. You know, we've got all these things happening. Which one of these topics that we're all talking about today do you three gentlemen think will come to nothing? So in other words, there'll be one of those that just fizzles out in time. Vincent?
So don't take notes. Huh? No, I have a serious doubt about blockchain. Because if you see the actual applications that are delivering money 10 years after people start talking about it, it's still Bitcoins. So probably we'll see some application, but I would say if you compare the buzz, the number of companies, the number of ICOs and the reality, there is a huge gap. So I think there is a problem over there. In artificial intelligence, I think we'll see more application, but not as smart as we expect. So basically, it's about replacing the 5 senses, recognizing patterns. So you have a lot of application for this. One 4G, for example, with generating each year 10 times the surface of Paris in images taken inside pipelines. And on these images, we try to find cracks, which can be as big as a blade of grass. So this is something totally impossible to do with people, and by using AI, we're able to do this, and in fact, to create new jobs of people who do the maintenance once you know you have a problem. So you'll see a lot of applications like this, but I think we'll probably see strong disappointment in places where people expect artificial intelligence to be intelligent. It is not.
Okay, interesting. Patrick, what are we talking about that may never happen?
So first, when you look at it, talking about the digital, there are two, from a corporate point of view, two areas. The first one is how you're leveraging digital to improve your current business. So, digitalization of your current business, either B2B or B2C. And the second one is around what we call disruption, and how you can, as you were explaining for the economics, generating totally new streams or revenue. That's the positive one, or totally destroy your company. That's the negative one. But that's not new, and that's why I prefer transformation at large and digital transformation. Because if you look at companies such as Saint-Gobain, which is the, very few people know that, but Saint-Gobain is the oldest company at large. In terms of history, they have been going through so many new products, new business model, and so on, or Siemens, which is more recent, so to speak, which in the past century has been totally transforming itself, decades after decades. So back on that, on the first point, on the digitalization of the current business, I truly think if I had to put a priority, I would say big data. With AI, with machine learning, and so on. Because one thing that is for sure is that currently, thanks to the technology, corporations are getting, an explosion of data. Data on client, data on their own product, and IoT has got a huge potential on that. Data on their own process. So if you look either at big industries such as Renault PSA, car industry, or Saint-Gobain, or Vinci, or even like a small SME in the construction business, for example, that can have major impact in terms of cost savings, in terms of customer satisfaction, and so on. One topic, for example, which is pretty hot right now in the car industry, is predictive maintenance. Quality issues is one of the highest cost in the car industry, and supply chain is one of the big component in terms of cost. With predictive maintenance, I mean, you're able to save massive cost in terms of supply chain, in terms of manufacturing, and at the same time really improve your customer satisfaction. And that's all based around putting in place the right big data strategy with, yes, the right technology and provider, but at the same time, the right process. Because as you know, one of the issues around big data is the governance. Because by definition, digital already is quite transversal. The data is even more transversal in a corporation. On blockchain, I don't fully agree because there are actually two topics in blockchain. You have got the whole, crypto point, and on that, I fully agree with you. But then you have got the whole part on how to use blockchain in your own internal process, being your certification and so on. And with all the booming topics around certification, security, e-payment, and so on, I think that the potential could be quite interesting. And again, on voice, huge potential because there is still so much to increase in terms of performance and in terms of usage. On the disruption side, one thing that always advising my clients is really the whole think out of the box. I mean, today what is both frightening for a CEO and exciting is that nothing is impossible. And the problem is, if I take the example of Renault, back in 2010, 80% of the plants, the factories of Renault were totally digitalized, so to speak, in terms of automation. But nobody within Renault saw BlaBlaCar coming. And that, again, is back on the mindset. And how do you see the world? If you're the Economist, are you purely like a media producing a weekly magazine? Are you like a new data center and so on? And that's valid really for any single companies. And what is striking for me that most of the time when I'm discussing with B2B or industrial customers, they tend to say, as you were saying, yeah, digital, it's for millennials, it's social network, who are building factories, who are producing, very serious product, high def, and so on. So it's not like a Uber or Airbnb who is going to compete with us. But because their view is basically delimited by their current business. And it's hard, to be honest, to really think out of the box and see which field you could go to, or which competitor can tomorrow come on your field. And that's why, for example, right now talking about buzz, because today it's still a buzz, autonomous driving, because you won't get any €1 turnover from autonomous driving come before like 2022 minimum, is that for the first time, you see very different sectors all converging on this autonomous driving. One of the quote I like is that, when Detroit meets Hollywood, and that's kind of that. You have got, car industries, you have got entertainment companies, you have got telco companies, and so on, all converging on this autonomous driving topic. And the reason why today it's so fussy is that by definition they are not used to work together.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Stephane, what do you think is not going to happen?
I'm not going to talk about the market, just going to get another example, I guess, maybe about where the future should not happen. I say my job is to make the future happen now, but there are some cases where you should not make the future happen now, all right? So I'm going to give you an example. As a chief data officer, of course, the CEO expectation was, oh my God, we're going to go big data, it's going to be amazing. Okay. And I think that the future normally of big data is to maybe solve complex problems, right, for us. But to me, you have to start leveraging big data, or data more simply said, to fix simple problems first. I like the recap from yesterday that you showed about fixing shit or making things simple. I'm going to give you an example about my first presentation to the board about the first data science exercise. If you could imagine their face. They spend a bit of money so that we build a capability, a data science capability. And as you say, Patrick, so that we can understand the linkages between engagement on apps, engagement on the web, on email, transactional data, any customer touch point in one place so that we can analyze, find correlation, and optimize. It's going to be amazing. And my first presentation was to come with one simple thing that is actionable. The first exercise was just to find the linkages between engagement and retention. Is a subscriber using a lot of the product more likely to stay with us? Simple question. And I came back with a very, very nasal kind of analysis. Yes, it does. Because for once, we're able to see that, example, we make a trial offer, £12 for 12 weeks. So it's really important to keep these guys when they come in. Be able to see the linkages between a high engagement, yes, highly engaged, more likely to stay with us, yes. So you could see the face of the board, okay, and? Well, the problem is, how do you start? Because if you say, I need to have an engagement strategy, another buzzword, where do I start? So I say, here we can know where to start. So I'm going to fast forward, but we've been able to break it down. Is it more the app usage, or the .com usage, or the newsletter usage that provide a higher stick rate? Well, we've been able to see it was one of the app, okay. But more interestingly, we've been able to see the first 4 weeks were critical, and we've been able to see that what was important was the real increment was at the beginning a little bit of usage. That's where you got really the return, because then it saturates. So guess what? We just realized we did such a bad job to onboard our clients, customer. We were fascinated by acquiring new subscribers. We were big data, personalization, retargeting, DMP, all the bells and whistles. But once they get in, we just let them, and then we beg them to stay with us. So we just took the basics and come back with how do we onboard them, how do we explain the benefit of the product, and from then you can iterate, measure, etc., adapt. But that's just a contrary example where, okay, you should not do that for 3 presentations, otherwise it's going to be a bit of a problem. But you just leverage a complex environment to solve a very simple problem.
Yeah. Vincent, do you have a point on that?
Yes, in fact, if you think about disruption, it's very important to understand that today you have really 3 different modes. So you have companies like typically have a lot of activities of interaction where you see a massive disruption. Why? Because with web application, you can totally replace 99% of the jobs. Typically retail or the call center part of the cab companies. Then you see production jobs. Production jobs is drivers or people in the manufacturing. In this domain, you see more what I would say the power of 1%. So if you make 1% on a stack which is making 10 billion, then you can make big money. So it's still, I would say, progressive improvement and also progressive disruption. And the example of the Renault manufacturing is funny because in the plants, not all the machines are connected today. So they still have MES, but the lean experts, they will explain you that if you want to do a proper lean, it's paper, pencil, and you just keep the digital out of the place because it brings too much rigidity. So, of course, digital will be more flexible and change, but that's a domain where you see more progressive improvement. And then there is a third domain of activities, I would say we are more designing activities, so like researchers, journalists, consultants. And in this domain, or doctors, in this domain, I would say the future is more augmented men. Think about a radiologist. So today, with AI, you can really recognize melanomes and being able to tell if they're cancerous or not better than a dermatologist. But what you can do is deal with the patient. What you can do is look at how he reacts and know what other symptoms he might have. And when you talk about radiologists, and in fact, we at GE did a survey on radiologists, they tell you we're relatively confident for 2 reasons. First, because we really think we'll be at the top of the pyramid of the description, so whatever happens will be the master. And of course, people at the bottom, like cab drivers in France, don't feel the same at all. Secondly, if you look at description, we as doctors would like to be disrupted of all the paperworks, all the activities that we don't want, we've been expecting for decades to be get ridden of. It's still not happening. In fact, if you look in the books, the first reference to the individual digital medical record in France, it was in 1969. It's still not existing. So I would say they're not scared about killing robots at all. They just want more digital, more AI taking the jobs they don't want, and they still think that they will have time to adapt. So that's designers, where it's really augmented man, producers, where it's more the power of 1%, and interaction jobs where you see lots of disruption. And if you don't have this framework in mind, you could expect change where they won't happen, or be too late to understand huge changes.
Got it. So a lot of conversation yesterday around data, to your point, and you've all mentioned data slightly differently. We've spent the last, I don't know how many years, 4 years or so, talking about big data, and then in came, as we were expecting, GDPR. In your opinions, has GDPR affected big data? Has it been an opportunity? Is it a blocker? What's GDPR done to us?
So first about big data. So I was trained at the data scientist. So long time ago, at that time, we were doing batch jobs with SaaS software on huge file. It was not told big data. Today, the same school repackage exactly the same lessons with some more IT lessons in data science. So this has existed, but of course it's accelerated a lot, and today the technology bricks are so easy that everybody can and should do it. Now, what you see with LGPD is something very interesting. I was talking at the United Nations 2 months ago about digital transformation, and I was surprised because you have 190 countries, and then the representative of Uganda telling me, okay, you're talking about a future that it's not existing here. Our problem is the following. We don't want to be the digital slaves of US company. So what will guarantee us it will happen? And if we don't have this guarantee, at some point there will be a trade war on digital. And I think GDPR is one answer to this, because GDPR is a law that lets people owning in some way their own data. And I think in the long term it's something very, very good to have conditions in which people accept to play this game. After the Cambridge Analytica story, in the US, 40% of the people between 18 and 30 close their Facebook account. So with GDPR, if they are protected, if they feel that they own their data, then you have more chance of having something which is sustainable. Now, what does it change? I would say it will give a competitive advantage to the company which are more able to deal with complex regulation. So probably, in some ways, the big companies. Probably the companies which are positioned on business models which are fair to the customers. I mean, the typical model in which you suck the value of the consumer by giving them free buys, maybe which are of limited value, this one are probably in danger. But I don't think that having fair rules, transparent, in which you ensure that the people get a fair value from the system in which they participate, I think in the long term, it's better to have these rules that some kind of digital Far West, which is a place where we are living. And in fact, if you look at the US, you see states that are going in the same direction that the RGPR.
Yeah.
Chinese is still very different in this dimension.
Okay. Patrick, GDPR, what's it meant?
Overall, I think it's good. It's good because on the one hand, on the corporate side, especially for the not too mature or digital savvy corporation, because of all the buzz and the media pressure and the legal pressure, CEOs. I saw a few CEOs or a legal director, getting frantic about the potential risk in terms of fines and so on. I think that helped the CDOs and all the digital guys in the corporation to put like a huge spotlight on potential of digital, but importance of digital. So they're actually discussing with a few CDOs recently. They told me that was actually a good help in terms of raising the bar and putting digital on the table at the C-level side. And on the other hand, on the GAFAM and startup side, it also gave us some kind of education on what you were saying. The fact that at some point those things are becoming so important and with so much impact that you can't you can't do like stupid things and go too far beyond borders. So overall, I think that the GDPR was had a good impact on the industry at large, plus helping sort the good and the bad in terms of providers and so on. The bigger problem where I'm honestly much more worried is talking about data, as we discussed before. In terms of impact, you have two sides of impact and of population. You have got the high end, so to speak, or all the intellectual jobs where digital is not killing their job, but just offering an added value. The problem is on all the either manual or very low hand jobs, both on the production side and on the basic customer facing side, where if you go all the way, there will be like massive layoff. I mean, one issue. So you have got, and then you have got the different situation. You have got the French mail, or actually any type of national mail where every year the mail is going minus 20%. So La Poste, how do you manage your 150,000 employees when your business is going minus 20%? And then you have got the issues of the banks, for example, where what's the point of having so many? If you look at Société Générale, BNP, and so on, we're talking about 50, 100,000 people in the agencies, which are more and more useless, to be frank. And that's why coming back to my point on HR, and that's also going all the way up to the government topics. We have got like a massive HR issue for this population, because honestly, a lot of the jobs are going to be a threat. When at the same time, on the first part of the job I mentioned, we're currently lacking of people and lacking of expertise. So the whole job market is quite worrying on that. And I don't think that the big corporation, the government, and so on, are really taking that point as serious as it should be, because we're not talking about futuristic vision. If you take a retail banking, discussing with a few directors there, I mean, put aside the political and image aspect, they could already tomorrow morning fire thousands of people.
Yeah. Okay. That's Patrick. Stephane, you're our final answer of the session.
Ooh. Okay, so I'm going to finish on the last one. I'm going to finish on a good one. First, a corporate answer, and then a personal answer.
Okay.
Corporate answer. Yes, GDPR is an amazing opportunity. Let's iterate against that. So the reality of GDPR has been impacting our business negatively first, right? Because you get less and less contactable universe for your marketing because not everybody opts in. You have less eyeballs you can retarget for advertising. So the first reaction is, oops, we got less eyeballs to monetize somehow. Positive aspect on the advertising business is that does a bit rationalize the advertising landscape, which means all the resellers of eyeballs and ID match, all this kind of stuff, suddenly get out of the equation somehow. So advertisers and marketers come back to old school publication like The Economist because they're going to trust context and other things. So that's interesting to see that first it look a bit, ooh, that's going to be challenging. But at the same time, we got more brief coming back to simple execution, interestingly, because that has the question about, is it real or not? So that was my corporate answer. Now, my personal answer is that I think it's another movie, Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz, don't look behind the curtain. Don't look behind the curtain. I think GDPR is to make people feel good, which is great, but that's a total wrong debate, I think. It's a personal statement I'm making here, not for my company, because there's never been as much as government surveillance at scale. And when I look at what we do with satellite today, there is no GDPR in space observation, 0. And you get meaningful insights. My point here, yes, individual rights are very important. Yes, individual data is important. But the reality, governments and intelligence can get very personal detail at scales anyway. So that doesn't answer that problem. It's more the commercial part of it, which is an important one. And second, we don't need your personal data to leverage you as a potential buyer. What I'm saying, when I say we, a marketer or people in general, not The Economist, marketers maybe don't care to know if you have a name and an age. They want to know if you're going to buy their product. So you can get meaningful insight without getting a lot of privacy. And when I look at what's going on with the satellite, I was so shocked when I met these companies. The only rule is resolution must be no lower than 30 centimeters. Then you can surveil whatever you want. And it's good because you cannot surveil you as a person, but we can monitor you as a company, maybe, looking at the numbers of trucks going out of your facilities, understanding when you're on and off, your storage level of crude oil, if you were total or whatever, and that there is no rule. So that's why I'm pushing it a little bit, but just I'm saying, yes, that's great, but that's just a sub topic. We're not fixing privacy with GDPR. We're just fixing some aspect regarding commercial and privacy and marketing.
Great. Gentlemen, I just wanted to say a very quick thank you for your openness and your honesty up on stage. It's great to hear the views and the opinions of real CDO characters in the real world. So please show your appreciation to the gentlemen on the round table.